What's up, class? My name is Michael Jambroni. I'm going to be doing the first story, which is Max's Quiet a Time. This is like take 30, so I hope it goes well. I hope my family doesn't yell. I hope my dog doesn't bark, but we'll see what happens. So, the story talks about Max. Max is a guy, he has three daughters, has a wife, and he's good with them, but he's more focused on work and doing things for himself. So he never really built a strong relationship with them. And because of that, when he gets older and his wife dies and he's in his 70s, two of his daughters leave him and only one stays. His daughter Gail stays around to take care of him. But eventually he breaks his hip. She realizes that she can't really help him anymore and he's going to need to go into an assisted living facility. And so Max goes to this place called Shady Elm, which the name should speak for itself. So Max is in the nursing home for about 2 years now. He's in his 80s. And Gail could tell that her father's starting to give up on life. He's starting to get very skinny and frail when he was always this big, healthy man. And the nurses at Shady Elm start to resent him because he's this old, grumpy guy that nobody really likes too much. And so they begin giving him these high doses of this drug called quetiapine, which I believe is how you pronounce it. That's how Google says you pronounce it. And quetiapine is used to treat schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. Now, Max doesn't have any of these disorders, but the nurses realize that it helps him get through these hard, big outbursts of anger and then depression. So they begin to look forward to actually giving him this medicine. That's when they call it Max's Quiet a Time. And so eventually Gail visits him, and this turns out to be the last Saturday that Max is alive. And she sees definitely a significant change in her father. He was shaking very badly. He had a very high fever. And she begged the nurses to call the doctor. But the head nurse claimed that it was just a bad case of the flu and that there was really nothing that could be done for him that night. And then by Monday morning, Max is found dead. And Shady Elm just writes it off as old age and the flu, and that they actually even deny Gail's request for an autopsy, which seems pretty sketchy in itself. So Gail, obviously wanting to find out why her father died, she sends it out for a private autopsy. And so the autopsy determines that yes, Max he has the joints, he has the heart, he has the body of an old man, but that's not the reason why he died. And so the autopsy also does find very high levels of quetiapine in his blood, but they determined that even that's not the reason why he died. So Gail knows there's some type of foul play involved, but she doesn't quite know how to prove it. And she's more determined to find out how her father died than to actually make money off this. She just wants to know. And so she starts doing some research and she starts surfing online and she finds Dr. Wu to investigate the case more. And he promises nothing. He says, his results might not be different than the lab results. But nonetheless, she still wants him to research it. And she tells him that she knows her dad was angry and grumpy and that the nurses probably wanted to keep him calm, but she still feels that they've done something wrong. There's something suspicious here. And she also notes that the nursing notes from the weekend that her father died are also missing, which in itself is very suspicious. So Dr. Wu, he went and looked at the toxicology report, and he also saw the high quetiapine levels. And so he actually calls the pathologist who did the autopsy, and it's a former student of his. And he remembers that she's kind of hot, which I thought was weird. But he calls her and he asks her why that the high levels of quetiapine weren't determined as the death. And she starts to explain the post-mortem redistribution phenomenon, which is that after death, blood levels can increase much higher than at the time of death, and that's due to leakage from the neighboring tissues, and that the extent of the seepage depends on the condition of the body and the time between death. So basically what she's saying is that while the level of quetiapine was seen as high, there is some kind of explanation for that, and she didn't think that there was anything suspicious in that. And Dr. Wu, he thought about accepting that answer right there and that there was nothing suspicious, but something about Gail made him want to continue on, and he starts doing more and more research into this case. So Dr. Wu begins to do more research on the equipment that the lab used and the tests they conducted, and he sees that there is a low level of another drug called prochlorperazine in Max's blood, but nobody really paid him much attention because it's not at a toxic level. But he calls Gail and tells her that they're going to sue Shady Elm. So after a few months, it goes into deposition, and Dr. Wu is able to explain that while the postmortem redistribution phenomenon may be able to explain the high level of quetiapine in his blood, that the low level of prochlorperazine shows that that's not what happened, because they would both be high if that was the case. So that means that there actually was a very high level of quetiapine in his blood, and that is what killed him. And eventually they begin to question the nurses, and a new nurse begins to crack, and she says that she was listening to her superiors, and on the weekend that Max died, she actually gave him a double dose of quetiapine, and that's probably what killed him. And now the head nurse denies that, and she also denies that she got rid of the nursing notes from that night, but everybody knows that's actually what happened, and Shady Elm actually settles with Gail, and she gets a nice chunk of money that she refuses to split with her sisters because they didn't do much, she did everything. And so Gail is obviously very relieved. She finally knows what actually happened to her father, and she does reconcile with her sisters and agrees to split the money with them. And I actually found this story very interesting because I think in a lot of times when an elderly person dies, people tend to just brush it off and they don't take much interest in it. Meanwhile, some shady stuff may have actually happened. And part I found confusing, there was a page or so where Dr. Wu was explaining the technical methods he used to determine the prochlorperazine levels. I kind of got lost a little bit there. But yeah, I thought it was a very interesting story. I thought it related to real life well. And that's my review. I have a cold, so sorry for the nasally voice.